about is how can we understand it? If the New Testament is God's revelation to humanity, the conclusion of it, or the sequel to the Hebrew Scriptures, if you will, then we do need to understand whether it's reliable or not. And then we also need to understand how we can understand it. How can I understand the biblical text? Well, think about it this way. Hermeneutics is the discipline of interpreting communication. The word hermeneutics comes originally from ironically, the Greek god Hermes, who is the spokesperson for the gods, and the discipline of understanding communication was named for Hermes, which is, again, I find kind of humorous. But it's basically just a discipline of interpreting communication, and in particular, written communication. Now, as we're looking at texts that are 2,000 years old, there are some challenges with understanding texts that are that ancient. A few of those challenges include the time gap, right? We're 2,000 years apart. That's significant. That makes a difference in how people communicate, how people understand. There's a difference in language. I speak English, and I don't do that generally very well. But the Hebrew Scriptures are written in Hebrew and some Aramaic, and the New Testament was written in Greek and Koine Greek, kind of the common legal version of Greek, later version of Greek. Well, in the first century, everybody understood Koine Greek, pretty simple. But 2,000 years later, nobody's using that. It certainly resembles modern Greek, but there's quite a few differences. And if a person isn't trained in Greek, they're not going to be able to read any of it, right? Now, we have translations, but those translations, anytime you move from one language to the next, you're losing something. So that's a hermeneutic challenge. Another is the difference in context. These books and letters were written in specific contexts of the first century. Well, those contexts aren't the same today necessarily. Certainly some aspects are, but it's a different context. Different cultures, another aspect of the hermeneutic challenge. 2,000 years later, different cultures, different standards, right? Understanding colloquialisms and different things like that. It's a hermeneutic challenge. Another big question as we think about understanding the biblical text, and specifically the New Testament, is who determines meaning? Is it the author or is it the reader? That's a very critical question to answer in regard to any communication. There's also different methods, and those methods will differ in how much of the meaning is determined by the reader versus the writer. Well, in normal communication, in every setting, the speaker or the writer gets to determine the meaning, right? But in these different methods, there's some variance there. There's the allegorical and spiritualization method, which will essentially try to find metaphor where the text doesn't specifically identify metaphor, to look at a particular kind of meaning that might not be integral or inherent in the text itself. Spiritualization is doing the same thing, but it is looking at for a deeper meaning, because the literal, straightforward meaning might not be deep enough for some. So allegorical and spiritualization is a metaphorical interpretation, and it's really the reader that determines what is the metaphor. Okay. Now, canonical and complementary essentially argues that the New Testament should be given the primary interpretive role. Well, in normal communication, the earlier communication sets the tone for the later communication. But in this particular hermeneutic approach, it flips it and gives the New Testament primacy so that the New Testament complements or can even change some of the Old Testament meaning. Then there's a theological hermeneutic, which is essentially the reader reads their theological ideas into the text. You've heard of the Christocentric or the Christological hermeneutic. That's reading Christology into the text, or the gospel-centered hermeneutic, or the redemptive hermeneutic, reading these theological ideas into the text and interpreting the text through the lenses of those theological ideas. And then there's kind of the normative communication idea, which technically is called literal grammatical historical. It means literal in the sense of normative, grammatical in the sense of recognizing and trying to follow the grammatical rules of the day in which the writing was written, and the historical in the sense of respecting that it was written in a historical time, and the grammar is in a historical time and context, right? So it's very contextual. Well, that's normal communication, right? We don't typically walk up to a desk and say to an attendant, I'd like to change my ticket. Instead of flying to Chicago, I'd like to fly to Dallas. And that attendant doesn't say, I need to figure out what the deeper meaning, what the spiritual meaning is, or what you must be speaking in a metaphor. We're looking at the normal meaning of nouns and verbs and trying to understand. If I go up to the desk and say I need to fly to Dallas instead of Chicago, they will start looking at my ticket. They're going to ask, well, let me see your boarding pass. Okay, and they'll start figuring out what flights are available, because they're going to take me at face value. That's kind of what we're dealing with, and that's one of the questions that hermeneutics wrestles with, and different interpretive traditions wrestle with, is should we interpret at face value, and what do you do with the difficult passages? Well, I'm coming from the perspective that we would try to consistently employ the literal grammatical historical, because we do that in every other area of life. The idea that God used nouns and verbs to communicate, and we ought to take those at face value and do that consistently. So that's kind of that's the idea. There's also a biblical model for understanding. The Bible itself models a hermeneutic method internally. Okay, it's one thing to have professors and teachers tell us we should interpret the Bible a particular way. It's another altogether when we see it within the text itself being modeled. If you interpret the Bible a particular way simply because I'm telling you should do that, then you're really relying on me. And someone else might tell you, and they might sound more convincing or less convincing, you should use a different approach. Well, at some point, you're just at the mercy of the people you're listening to. And I would encourage you, get into the biblical text yourself. Look at the Genesis model, for example. Look at the Genesis account, and look at all the speech acts in Genesis. And just ask, were these speech acts taken at face value? Or are some of these different hermeneutic models employed? When God said, "Let there be light," what did he do? When God told Abram to go from his father's house, what did Abram do? When God told Noah to build a boat, what did Noah do, right? And we could go on and on and on. So there's a model in integral and inherent within Genesis, and I would suggest that's the literal grammatical historical model, and that is what we ought to be employing. Now, different traditions, different theological traditions will employ different theological hermeneutics, and that's largely how we arrive at many of these differences.